Okay, well, welcome everybody to the 7th of our Breeding Briefs webinar series. We've found it to be a very informative and very popular series. We started with our type traits, our new composite type traits, and since then we've spoken about calving ease, gestation length, mastitis, and today what we're going through is our success or how to breed for fertility. So, and we welcome today, all the way from South Australia, Shane Gardner. Shane manages a 350 cow Holstein herd just on the outskirts of Mount Gambier. And we've invited Shane for a purpose. He does more than just sit on the edge of his feed trough, Shane, don't you?
Oh, yeah, we only got 250, Pete, not 350.
Oh, 350. I must have counted the heifers.
Must have. Yeah, sorry.
But that's, and how long have you been milking where you are, Shane? Just to give us a background.
We've been here 11 years now, so.
11 years, predominant Holstein?
Or bar the one crossbred, yes.
Crossbred. And Shane likewise has had quite an experience in the industry too, as was involved in herd test and AI, but is now putting cups on, which is great. So Shane will be using your experience in terms of what Shane has done in his herd and the success that he's seen with breeding for fertility. So welcome, Shane.
Welcome, yeah.
Okay, well, when we look at fertility, it's probably one of our most, well, it is one of our most complex traits. So it's not just a single thing that influences whether or not you have a good or bad result with fertility. So each of those listed traits or indicators are actually things that influence the results. So, you know, what Shane's dealing with regularly is all of those together. And it's a matter of getting all of that coming together so that you actually get a successful pregnancy and a calf born. So there's a lot of moving parts, Shane, isn't there, with fertility?
Yeah, there is, definitely is.
And if you look, you know, transition cow, semen management, even the bull management, if you're naturally mating at the end. But the fantastic part of fertility is that even though there's a lot of influence coming from environment and management, so what's happening on the farm, what's happening with the seasonal conditions, the very pleasing thing is that we do see differences genetically. So if we look at a single herd and the cows are all treated similarly, we can see variation, and that's really is what we breed for, is that there are differences between different animals and different strains, different breeds, and fortunately there's enough variation that we can actually breed for that and include that in our mating programs. So it's a very, very powerful tool, and we'll see, particularly when we look at Shane's results, what he's been able to do each generation. Each generation's a step forward, a small step, but all of those steps add up to some really good results. So just as we look, I think it's important to look back and see what happened to fertility over time. So this is actually a fascinating graph. It's actually the different breeds, and it's US information. So, but it follows right back through until 1960. So we're talking about over 50 years. And what you can see is fertility for all breeds. So the important thing is it's not just one breed, but fertility for all breeds was slowly declining. Now, the reason for the decline was that at the same time, we were actually selecting for increased production. So production was going up and fertility was actually going down. Now, the interesting part is people say, well, why did you let it slip? What we see here was actually calculated after the event, so retrospectively. So we were able to go back and look at it, but in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, we didn't actually have ratings for fertility. So we weren't able to measure it at the time, and we weren't able to see it, but we can retrospectively now, and all breeds were actually declining at a similar rate until about the early 2000s. So when we look at the trend here in Australia, very similarly, we see across years, so year of birth of the animal, and we were watching a steady decline. And I think it's fair to say, Shane, during those periods too, we had the comment from people that they had cows that were making more milk, but they were harder to get in calf, weren't they? Like, in other words, production was up, but fertility was declining, wasn't it?
Definitely. People just focused on that because that's what we measured and that's what we sold on. And people just kept doing it, and that was a byproduct of not getting cows pregnant, they thought. But we can change that around now.
Yep. And it's true to say too, I think, Shane, that we actually managed it in other ways, like split calving. So in other words, the cow was given a reason. Oh, she's a high production cow. She's not going to get in calf within a 12-month period, so we'll push her into another split group. So we actually probably masked the problem at the time by managing it in other ways, didn't we?
That's how most of the GMU farms operated because of that. And that's what we still are now. Split calving, that's due to other reasons now, but that's what it started from, was not getting cows pregnant, 20 years ago.
Absolutely, yes. But if you have a look, there was a significant, well, when I say significant turnaround, it was a plateau. If you look at 2000, so what happened was about 2003, we had our first fertility breeding value developed. So it was rudimentary or fundamental at the time. It was just based on one trait, which was calving interval. But what it was able to do is to stop the decline. So if you look at the decline in cow fertility, this is year of birth of the cow, we actually stopped the decline. So that introduction of that fertility then allowed us to actually halt the decline. So we added fertility. So we had a fertility breeding value. We added that to the APR, which was our index, the profit ranking at the time. And then progressively in 2010, we increased the relative importance of it. Very importantly and significantly in 2011, we actually coupled it to genomics. So we were then able to look at young bulls, so not just proven, but young bulls. And then in 2013, we had a significant introduction of what we call a multi-trait, a new model for assessing daughter fertility. So what we're looking at with fertility are really some key traits, is that the cows returning to cycling quickly after calving, those cows showing signs of heat or estrus, getting in calf or conceiving, and staying in calf. So it's not just one aspect we look at with fertility, it's all four. The challenge we had back around the 2003 and certainly 13 was that we had a lot of data, but it was sitting on farm. So we had cow records, we had pocket diaries, we had all that mating and joining information, but it was actually sitting on farm. So it wasn't sitting where our researchers, and I'll introduce one of those in a minute, we didn't have that mating data sitting there to use. So there was a consolidated effort we knew we needed. So through Dr. Jenny Price, or now Professor Jenny Price, working in conjunction with Tui Nguyen, we actually worked on a project where we wanted to increase the amount of fertility data that we held. And we had a program, Tui, didn't we, where we actually targeted farm data, and we were able to move that data from farm into electronic systems where we could use that for research purpose. So what that allowed us to do was to introduce a new fertility model in 2013. So previously, all we had was calving interval data. So the cow calved here this year, she calved at this date the year after. So that was 2003. What we were able to do in 2013, was to actually include these other measures. So the length of lactation, days to first service, the non-return rate, and the pregnancy rate. So we had all those four other additions that combine with calving interval to give us a multi-trait fertility ABV. So what we saw was the old fertility was good. it stopped the decline. The new fertility model, the multi-trait in 2013, was better. And what we've been able to do now is really push a lot more data into that, add genomics, and the accuracy now is so much better compared to where we were, back in 2003. So we do measure that. We actually look at our breeding values, and what we're able to do is validate that. So we look at our fertility breeding values of our bulls. So this is the range where bulls are below 97, between 97 and 100. This is fertility breeding value, and likewise above. And Dr. John Morton, who's a very respected veterinarian, he was able to assess and find that the daughters of these bulls we do see significant increases across their 6-week calf rate. So going from bulls below average and below 40%, now we're seeing bulls approaching 50 and better, where the 6-week calf rate is so much better. So what are the benefits to increase fertility? Well, the benefits are on both male and female side. So we get more cows pregnant, hopefully to better bulls. We get them in calf earlier, in a shorter time as possible. We get more heifer calves born early, and we get more heifer replacements to enter the milking herd, which then puts pressure on the older cows. So really, with what you've done, Shane, you've been able to work both sides, haven't you? So both the male. So if we look at...
Yes, we have been able to work both sides.
And so what, in your sire selection, Shane, you're very critical on now setting fertility as a minimum?
We've done a minimum for a very long time. The base has moved a bit over time. Currently, we don't look at anything under 108 for daughter fertility at the moment.
Yep.
It's got to be 108 or better at the moment. So.
Yep. And then what you're seeing, you're joining heifers. So you're joining your maiden heifers, which likewise gives you a lot more heifer calves to select from. And what we'll look at too is some of Shane's results where he's now genomically testing those calves. So it's not just the bulls you're putting pressure on, Shane, but also your females, aren't you?
Oh, the females get more pressure than the bulls.
So in essence, you're hitting both, aren't you? Male and female.
Definitely.
And the results we'll see from Shane in a slide or two are quite dramatic. So if we look at the fertility trends, what we're able to see, so this is if we've got daughter fertility ABV on the left-hand side, and we've got year of birth of animals down on the bottom side. So what we're able to see is we see very clearly that reduction. We were seeing the decline in fertility until about that 2003, when we had the first introduction of a fertility breeding value. But it just stopped the decline. It didn't really lift until we got to about 2013, and we've seen quite a dramatic increase now in the fertility breeding values on our sires. And then that carries over to the cows. So if you look at the cows, our females will run a little bit behind the bulls, but you can see similar trends almost identically with the cows. So we're now seeing a lift in cow fertility, and likewise the herd fertility is starting to change as well in a positive direction. So if we drill down, Shane, and we actually look at your data, so this is your genetic progress report. So people that are herd recording, I know you were a very keen observer of this from early days. What this tells us, Shane, is that you're really making some really good gain across all of the key traits, but the one that really impresses me, and we'll see in this next slide, is your fertility. So question, if we talk about 2013 as probably the changing point with the multi-trait model, if we look at the year of birth of your calves, your graph was already on the way up before then.
We made a decision back in 2008. I started to try and do it. It was hard because it was hard to find enough bulls to do it. I was using a little bit of the US system at the time, just trying to stop the what's the word?
the decline.
I started to put a minimum in, and the minimum was even just 0. I didn't want to try and buy negatives back then. If that makes sense.
Yes.
That's when we tried to just stop. If that makes sense.
Yep.
And that was where we started from.
Yeah. So you were selecting overseas bulls based on their overseas daughter. So this is daughter fertility values.
Yep.
And we can see with the calves, your calves, so this is the national trend. This is the Holstein national trend. You were already significantly above the national trend. And you can see from really 2013 onward. And, not every decision is, sometimes
we had a bad year. We picked 5 bulls that didn't work as well as I hoped.
Yep. And
that's what happened. That's what happened.
That happens. But
it's getting less and less, I can tell you that.
Yeah. And if you look at the shape of your graph, you've managed to keep ahead consistently across that period. And, what we'll see, particularly with the pressure you're putting on your females genomically, is that you'll certainly, but it's a great result. And you're seeing the impact of that in your cow herd chain in terms of pregnancies and cows getting in calf quickly now, aren't you?
We find so, yes, we're retrieving, we think, pretty good results. So, yes.
Yeah. And by genomic testing heifers, it really helps. So what we're looking at, where does fertility get used? Well, we'll have 2 main indices in December, which is our Balanced Performance Index, or BPI, and our Health Weighted Index, or HWI. And what we'll see in both these indices is that fertility is an important inclusion. So what we're looking at through the MBO review is we'll be introducing some new indices in December of this year. So from December, you'll actually see new weightings, and I've listed those. So our Holstein BPI, and then we'll have our Holstein HWI. Now, the important part is to look, and fertility is actually going in at 13%. And previously it went in at about 12%, so it's actually an increase. But the important part to note is with the HWI, the Health Weighted Index, fertility will be doubled. So the Health Weighted Index will actually increase fertility, and that will be taking that from production. So if you look at the drop in production at 44% in the BPI, the Health Weighted Index will actually come back to 28%. So quite a significant change there coming up in December. And likewise, Jersey, similarly, we're looking at fertility at about that 10% on the Jerseys, and we're seeing likewise what we'll see for the Jersey HWI is that will be doubled as well. So the push for fertility is not decreasing. It's actually what we'll be able to offer you indices, or farmers through the Good Bulls Guide and Good Bulls app will be able to offer you indices that really make fertility front and center. And importantly, we're seeing some really positive results from that. They are economic indices, the BPI, so it's economically weighted. So we do a lot of research to actually show that having cows that get in calf quickly, and likewise increasing fertility on heifers, does have a positive effect. So what's looking at those 2 indices, Shane, you'll have the choice of either going, as is with BPI, or you'll be able to really ramp up fertility and double it in the HWI.
Kind of in the past, I kind of used my own index of between the BPI and HWI anyway. I kind of looked between the 2 to see which ones, how they ranked. And there's some big changes there coming forward. Yep. So I'll wait to see how the numbers land. I think presume this is going to go in December.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I guess with what you've been doing, you've been using BPI, but you've set 108 as a bottom line, haven't you? So in other words, you've really ramped up your own version of that, haven't you?
Yes, kind of what I've done, yeah. I've manipulated to suit what I kind of put more weighting on, if that makes sense. Yes. Over the time, yeah.
Absolutely. So you've in essence been running higher than 13% anyway.
Yes. And I lower production anyway automatically because I don't pick too extreme on that side of it, I think. Anyway, that's where I've been manipulating it myself. Sorry.
And no, that's great. And with that, what Shane has been able to do through the Good Bulls app is really dial up. So your minimum, Shane, would have been 108 minimum. Now, how many bulls do you get? Like, are you down to a small number, or you still got a lot to pick from?
Not anymore. There's a lot to pick from. In the past, you could ramp it down quite quickly. In the last 12 months, I think there'd be still 200 bulls to pick from. But I've had to find if I don't answer it. I think there'd be a couple hundred bulls still to pick from.
Still, absolutely,
yep.
And both proven as well as genomic. So you don't differentiate now, like you use young bulls just as you would proven.
I work on a simple. There's a BPI number, and then there's a reliability behind it. That's it. That's the way I kind of look at it. So I don't worry about too much proven, non-proven. If it's got a high reliability, that's great, and it's got a BPI as well. They're the two numbers I look at to a degree.
Great, yeah, and you'll find with modern breeding, particularly with some of the young bulls, that fertility has really been vamped up, or ramped up in their pedigrees. So you probably find that there's an increasing number of young bulls as well. So certainly for those that haven't yet looked, you can download the Good Bulls app. It's available from the App Store, and very simple to use, and you're able to really dial up your own recipe as Shane has, and it's a great tool to set minimums, set criteria, and come up with a short list of bulls. Now, the other part of what you've done, Shane, is it's one thing to use a good bull. You made a cow. Do you always know what you're going to get at the other end? Like you get a heifer calf that should be A plus B, but what you've found, and everybody finds over time, Shane, is that that combination, you really need to test it at that next level, don't you? The heifer level.
Definitely. Like, you talk about 1 + 1 = 2. In genetics, it's going to be anywhere 1 + 1 through to -1 through to -4. You just don't know the answer. So you pull those, hair sample, take an ear notch, then you get to find out, in 8 weeks' time what it should be like, and then you can make better decisions. It's a no-brainer anymore.
Yeah. So with your heifers now, you use your maidens, you get a surplus. The first thing, one of the first things you do is grab the hair, or grab the ear notch, get a result, and then work out the ones you want to keep, but more importantly, the ones that you've freed up to sell.
Their biggest improvement is you buy, we use 6 bulls at each mating time. That helps definitely, pick what you can at the top. Then it's removing the tail. Is anyone's going to make the best improvement on your herd is by removing the tail.
Yep.
Yeah.
So your gains are made more by actually working with the bottom, taking the bottom out, than it is focusing purely at the top. The top is there. So long as you know the heifers in your herd, you're fine, but you can make more gains by actually taking that bottom out, can't you?
Yes, the top is the top. It'll look after itself to a degree. The tail is, if you can remove that, you remove lots of different problems, and that goes across all the, indices kind of thing, your type, or your somatic cell, and even daughter fertility, all of them. If you can remove the problem, it actually helps you overall instead of trying to improve if you don't need to.
Absolutely. So if we look at a typical group of heifers, you've got the best heifers on the right-hand side, the gold ones, and you've got the ones that aren't so good on the left-hand side. So what Shane's doing is really exactly this strategy where, you draw a particular line. It may not be a definitive line on just one trait. BPI is obviously a guide, but Shane, no doubt, looks at things like fertility, mastitis that are included. So you get your keepers, the heifers you're going to work with, and amongst that, you get some people that will then split them again into groups that they may put sex semen into, or other work. But importantly, you identify, Shane, that bottom group. And the important part about removing them is that A, that you don't have to milk them to the future, but B, they don't get a chance to put a heifer back in the herd again, do they?
No, that's different. That happened here when I took on the business here 11 years ago. They were doing exactly that. They weren't actually mating certain cows, buying a Frisian bull, putting him back in, then actually not having enough heifers and keeping it. And then they're wondering why they weren't improving at any rate, because they just kept the tail out of a weaker bull too, which was doubling down. It was, frustrating at the start. Yep.
So the other part of fertility, so what we've just covered is daughter fertility. So it's the fertility of cows that are the daughters of particular bulls. The other side of fertility which is different. It's actually semen fertility. So it's the ability of a bull's semen or a dose of semen to get a cow pregnant. So it is different to daughter fertility, and we'll show you that they're two unrelated traits, but an important part of semen fertility is that we do measure that. And there is an effect of both genetics as well as environment. So it's not all about genetic semen fertility. It's a value. So it's not a breeding value per se. And we find that there are some bulls at the top. So bulls that are very good at getting cows pregnant, their semen fertility is high. We get a big group in the middle. So we've got about 10% at the top that are really good at getting cows pregnant ahead of others. 80% in the middle, which are really bulls that do just a normal job. And we get about 10% at the bottom that still get cows pregnant, but they struggle. So their fertility is not quite as high. Now, the important thing with semen fertility breeding values is that they aren't related to daughter fertility. So if you actually have a bull that's really good at getting cows pregnant, semen fertility, it doesn't connect always that their daughters are. An example I'll use was actually a bull that I worked with over many years, was a bull called Lucky Strike. You'd remember him, Shane?
Yeah, he's nice and white.
Nice and white. He would get cows pregnant from meters away. Like his semen fertility was just outstanding. So very popular. But unfortunately, what we found out over time was that his daughters were difficult to get pregnant. So as easy as he got cows pregnant with semen, his own daughters were very difficult to get pregnant. So he was the great example of the link not being always. So they are two different traits. So what we do is we generate those values from the collected breeding data. So we get a lot of information in on joinings and also repeated joinings. So did a bull, did that cow get mated 3 times, 4 times, once, twice? We collect all that and we publish the semen fertility for bulls above 400 matings. So the average is 0. So it's actually, and what you'll see is it's a plus or minus. So most bulls sit between plus or minus 2.5. We have some bulls that do push out to either extreme. As I said, they're the top 10%, the bottom 10%. But on average, they are useful. The only thing is, Shane, that we, of course, we don't gather that until a bull's got conception data. So some of our young genomic bulls that are fresh off the shelf, absolute newbies, well, you're not going to see that information in the first, 9 to 12 months anyway.
Yeah, it's just the risk you take if you want to use new bulls.
Do you look at semen fertility, Shane, or you basically assume if it's in a straw, it's fair to go?
No, it's part of our selection, but I do look at yours, but there's a bit of a lag behind the US. I hope the US has it there, and I kind of go off that one a little bit more just because it's sometimes used there a bit quicker.
Yep.
And I have but I'm happy to use a bit older genetics to have some in there and some. I don't try and spread it, have no semen fertility across all my 6 bulls. I try and have it across 4 of them, and then just use 2 just for risk, mitigation.
Yep. But as we say, there's a lot of moving parts with getting a cow pregnant. Semen fertility is one, but it's not a main driver. As I say, you're probably looking at 90% of bulls that are either average or better. There's only a very, very small number that probably are below average, but even then they'll still get cows pregnant at a reduced rate. So where to find that? The semen fertility can be found on the DataGene website, the file. So you look for the semen fertility, 400 plus matings, and you can download that particular file, and that is an Excel file, and that contains all the information that we've collected on bulls, be it Australian or across breeds, Australian as well as overseas bulls that are used here. There's also a learning resource. So our learning resource section, we do have some tech notes and fact sheets, and we've got an updated one on fertility that is now posted to there. So certainly feel free to look at our Data Gene website and look up the fact sheet on that. And that will also explain semen fertility breeding values as well. So with that, just before we open it up to discussion, but certainly what makes fertility breeding values work is data. So we're very grateful and very appreciative of all the farmers like you, Shane, that actually store that data. So you don't just store it in your pocket diary. It actually goes into an electronic form, isn't it? You've used dairy data for many years.
Yeah, we have, a long time.
So all your joinings, all your matings, that all goes in, plus the birth of the calf. So we've now got mechanisms or systems by which we can move that data into our across from farm to herd test centre, and then across to Data Gene for analysis. The breed societies obviously play a big role too in the information we collect. A significant role now is played by the AI and the bull companies. A lot of credit goes to the fact that when fertility was introduced back in 2000, particularly 2003, there was an immediate shift to probably moving away from negative daughter fertility bulls. And certainly after 2013, Shane, I think it's almost impossible now to see too many bulls on the market that have got negative daughter fertility, isn't it?
I don't think any semen company is willing to bring them in.
No.
You'd have to actively try to breed below 100, I think.
Yes, agreed. So congrats to the bull companies for a concerted effort to actually help that. The herd test centres that obviously collect the farm data, and to the dairy software providers, Maestro, Easy Dairy, you're using dairy data, Shane, particularly to be able to collect that and send that through to us as well. So it's really a great story. Fertility was something that we broke. So in the quest to actually push production, it was one of the rubber bands that progressively broke. But it shows you what happened. Once we identified that there was an issue, we were able to actually correct it, address it, collect a lot of data, and now particularly with breeding values on daughter fertility as well as genomic testing, there's two tools there that will be fantastic to all people, all farmers to use. And each generation, Shane, will get better. So it's not a quantum lift, is it? Like it's a little step each generation.
It's definitely a little step each time. You know, breeding, the daughter fertilities are one of those funny ones. You keep getting, you know, all you can do is just keep picking high, because they're going to change over time as we get more and more data and realise, are we right, are we wrong? You know what I mean? You know, we've had a few corrections over time. So you just got to keep picking high. You've got one choice each. You know, for us, it's twice a year we get to make a choice on what bulls we're going to buy. You might as well make it a good choice. And to me, it's just a no-brainer. You know, pick as high as you think it's relevant and go from there and pick other traits while you're going.
Yep. And even then, after you've selected your high bull, Shane, and you've made what should be the perfect mating, you validate that by genomic testing, don't you? So even then, if you've got a daughter of a bull that's rated high for daughter fertility, if she doesn't carry that package, there's no questions asked, is there? Like, she's out.
To a degree, yeah. We kind of actually cull mainly on BPI at the moment, because it just seems to link to go, yeah, I'm happy with that at the moment. Sometimes at the start, oh no, that cow's better and this one's that. And then the last time I did the cull last group, it was pretty much just straight off BPI. They were the tail across everything. They might have been a bit weak on ASI, they might have been a bit weak on daughter fertility, you know what I mean? And it just one trait there just kept lifting them. And so, yeah, it's sometimes, yeah, you'll see some 100 average animals, but that's just how it is. Sorry, yeah.
Yep. No, it's really good. Yeah.
We have some questions now, Pete.
Yeah.
Everybody's welcome now to unmute and turn their cameras on if they'd like.
No.
But Stephanie Bullen from Dairy Australia has asked you, Shane, are you selecting your heifer replacements following genomic testing on their fertility ABV or BPI only?
A combination. It's like I just said, BPI seems to end up ruling because it just seems to work. When you looked at it, you could pull, that cow's a bit low for that. But then there's another two others. Basically across a lot of indexes, like I don't mind chopping the worst off of every kind of trade. If it's ASI, is it daughter fertility, is it somatic cell? They're all profit-driven kind of basic selections I do, and they end up almost being BPI anyway, because that's how it's kind of structured, if that makes sense.
She also wants to know what percentage of the tail that you sell.
Between 10 and 15%, depending on how many we get. So we have a set number of animals we want to bring into the herd. We rear up so much, and after about 10 to 15%, you're making 50-50 calls, I find, on who goes and who doesn't go. And then yeah, so it's the bottom 10% your easy ones. The next 5% improve, and after that, I don't think you start making the improvements you think you are. It just starts getting to that middle of that bell curve.
Do we have any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, g'day. It's Paul Quinlan here. How you going, Shane?
Good yourself?
Yeah, good. Great presentation by everyone. Do you have any confirmation traits? Do you throw any confirmation traits into your bull selection at all, Shane?
Yeah, we minimise stature, and I would try and protect against teat length, and just basically try and keep them balanced as best I can. Nothing too extreme. So I try and cap stature and minimise against teat length. Is pretty much the main two.
Good,
Anybody else?
Any more questions there? But I think just to summarise, Shane, with what you're doing, selecting the bulls based on their daughter fertility, their daughter fertility ABVs, and then genomic testing your heifers, you're on the fast road. So in other words, you'll be breeding, the best from the best, and fertility will only get quicker as we actually get further down the track. So it's a great story, a fantastic example of how we can actually turn a trait round, and the tools and the technology is there now for all producers. So it's certainly easy tools to use, Shane, and not that difficult, are they?
That's not that hard at all. I set my minimums through the Good Bulls Guide on what I want, and that's across a lot of indexes, because we're not just focusing on daughter fertility. I know we're talking about daughter fertility today, but we focus on all the profit traits and even linears to a degree. Like we just minimise. I've got to set to Paul, but I'm after ASI. I'm after reducing my cell count. Mastitis resistance starting to kick in as I get my. That was only just come out in April, I think. So I'm just starting to work on that one. Feed save's a big one for us for a while. I know we're talking about daughter fertility today, but you can pick across a lot of things and just keep improving all of them. Like you showed on my report before, all things are heading on the right direction.
That's great. Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Shane, for giving us the grassroots and the hands-on. And you're proving like it does work. You're putting the rubber to the road, or you're actually putting the technology in your own cows, your own paddock, your own heifers, and we're seeing the positive results, which is great. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will have another session in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be talking about female genomics. So we welcome you to that, and we thank you for joining with us today. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.